The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University, we're reading from what is apparently Donald Trump's second favorite book. His number one, according to his first wife, as I recall, was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which was on his bed next to his, or on his bedstand next to his bed for years. But when he was asked by reporters his favorite book, he said P.T. Barnum's The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money. So I thought, hey, let's check this out. This is from the introduction. Those who really desire to attain an independence, but have only to set their minds upon it and adopt the proper means, as they do in regard to any other object which they wish to accomplish, and the thing is easily done. But however easy it may be found to make money, I have no doubt many of my hearers will agree it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth is, as Dr. Ben Franklin truly says, as plain as the road to the mill. It consists simply in expending less than we earn. That seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of the genial Dickens, puts the case in a strong light when he says that to have an income of £20 per annum and spend £20 and 6 pence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only £20 and spend but £19 and 6 pence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my readers may say, we understand this. This is economy, and we know economy is wealth. We know we can't eat our cake and keep it also. Yet I beg to say that perhaps more cases of failure arise from mistakes on this point than almost any other. The fact is, many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misapprehended, and people go through life without properly comprehending what that principle is. One person says, I have an income of so much, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he gets something ahead and I fall short. Why is it? I know all about economy. Well, he thinks he does, but he does not. There are many who think that economy consists in saving cheese parings and candle ends. Keep in mind, this was written in the late 1900s. In cutting off 2 pence from the laundress's bill and doing all sorts of little mean, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. The misfortune is also that this class of persons let their economy apply in only one direction. They fancy that they are so wonderfully economical in saving a half penny where they ought to spend 2 pence that they think they can afford to squander in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one might stop overnight at almost any farmer's house in the agricultural districts to get a very good supper. But after supper, he might attempt to read in the sitting room and would find it impossible with insufficient light from just one candle. The hostess, seeing his dilemma, would say, it is rather difficult to read here in the evenings. The proverb said, you must have a ship at sea in order to be able to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on extra occasions. Those extra occasions occur perhaps twice a year. In this way, the good woman saves $5, $6, or $10 in that time, but the information which might be derived from having an extra candle would, of course, far outweigh a ton of candles. But the trouble does not end there. Feeling that she is so economical in tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to go frequently to the village and spend $20 or $30 for ribbons and furloughs, many of which are not necessary. This false economy may frequently be seen in men of business, and in those instances, it often runs to paper writing. You find good businessmen who save all the old envelopes and scraps and would not tear a new sheet of paper if they could avoid it for the world. This is all very well. They may in this way save $5 or $10 a year, but being so economical only in note paper, they think they can afford to waste time, to have expensive parties, and to drive their own carriages. This is an illustration of Dr. Franklin's, quote, saving at the spigot and wasting at the bunghole, or penny wise and pound foolish. Punch, and speaking of this one idea class of people, says they are like the man who bought a penny herring for his family's dinner and then hired a coach and 4 to take it home. I never knew a man who succeed by practicing this kind of economy. True economy consists in always making the income exceed the outgo. Wear the old clothes a little longer if necessary. Dispense with the new pair of gloves. Mend the old dress. Live on plainer food if need be. So that under all circumstances, unless some unforeseen accident occurs, there will be a margin in favor of the income. Penny here, a dollar there, placed at interest, goes on accumulating, and in this way, the real desire is attained. It requires some training, perhaps, to accomplish this economy, but once used to it, you will find there is more satisfaction in rational saving than in irrational spending. Here's a recipe which I recommend. I have found it to work an excellent cure for extravagance and especially for mistaken economy. When you find that you have no surplus at the end of the year and yet have a good income, I advise you to take a few sheets of paper and form them into a book and mark down every item of expenditure. Posted every day or week in 2 columns, one headed necessities, the other comforts, and the other headed luxuries. And you will find that the latter column will be double, triple, and frequently 10 times greater than the former. The real comfort of life costs but a small portion of what most of us can earn. Dr. Franklin said, "It is the eyes of others and not our own eyes which ruin us. If all the world were blind except myself, I should not care for fine clothes and furniture." It is the fear of what Mrs. Grundy may say that keeps the noses of most worthy families to the grindstone. In America, many persons like to repeat, "We are all free and equal," but it is a great mistake in more senses than one. That we are born free and equal is a glorious truth in one sense, yet we are not all born equally rich, and we never shall be. So anyhow, the book is The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money by P.T. Barnum. It's actually a pretty good book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Wednesday, first hour. That means it's middays with Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, brilliantly representing the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives, is on the line with us. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in representative, Rep Mark Pocan, M-A-R-K-P-O-C-A-N. Congressman, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
And for our listeners, Congressman Pocan is with us for the hour, and he's taking your calls, 202-808-9925. Congressman, I understand, I've been watching this kind of Fox News right-wing hate radio bubble getting ready to explode because a group of Republican congressmen or their staffers have written a secret memo. It's like, I've got a secret memo here. Anyway, you are taking this on head on. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I went, since we had the shutdown, I went down and read the, top secret memo that's going to blow a hole into, what the FBI corruption is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, I can't tell you specifics of the memo. It's a 4-page memo. But, I left there, and it is remarkable the amount of hype they're giving to something that has such little content. It's like if you went to, Christmas to buy something at Best Buy and you left with a Betamax player, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of use, but they're trying to put some subterfuge out there to, again, take away from the Russia investigation that gets closer and closer to the president directly, and they're trying to put misinformation out. And, to tell you how bad this is, Tom, if I can just add 2 things. One, they won't share the memo with the FBI or the Department of Justice. Again, ridiculous, a classified memo. And 2, they are really putting this out there as if, there is something to all of this. And, I fully support releasing the memo, because I think if everyone sees what's in this memo and the evidence that brought them to whatever crazy conclusions they came up with, you will see how pathetic this call is, that there's some kind of smoking gun. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors and everything else that they're putting out there right now to try to, again, create some subterfuge around Russia. But it is amazing. And the Russian bots on Twitter, et cetera, ran with this weekend. So they've got a lot of help from the people who helped bring the election to them.
It's pretty amazing.
Let's expose it. Let's expose it, and let's expose whatever evidence they collected to get there.
Yeah, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Amen.
Absolutely.
I'm curious your thoughts on the shutdown, how it was played, and how Senator Schumer has changed his position now on being willing to swap $18 billion of funding for DACA, for a border wall and all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think Senator Schumer was in a tough place to begin with, right? You've got the House of Representatives that's incapable of passing a real budget bill because of the Tea Party, 30 or 40 people. If they don't vote for it, you have to have Democratic votes. But if they go and get Democratic votes, the Tea Party threatens to throw out whoever's in leadership. So you've got a House that is not actually a real player in this. And then you've got a president who every time they've had an agreement over the last several months on virtually any issue, the agreement blows up. Most recently, in the last week, they would have an agreement with the president, and then all of a sudden Kelly or someone else would come from the staff and say, well, what the president really meant was, and then you lose the deal that you just cut. You can't do that. If you have negotiations, you have to stick by the agreement. So given that you've got a House partner that's completely unable to do anything. You've got a White House that you can't trust when you have a deal. They won't take yes for an answer. He was in a tough spot, and I think the fact that we got the CHIP funding, which was important, that we have, I think, what they feel is a much stronger position on DACA, including now infamous talking sticks that Susan Collins and others passed around, that may have been what I think Chuck Schumer thought the best he could get out of having such problematic partners. Now, I and many others didn't vote for it. I am somewhat of a hardliner when it comes to the DACA issue. This is something the president broke. We shouldn't trade for something that everyone says we want to fix, and we agree there isn't a problem. But honestly, most of the debate that we've been having as Democrats around the continuing resolution and on funding in general is that there's an agreement we've had in place for several budgets between Paul Ryan and Patty Murray that there was parity in funding for non-defense and defense. So they can't just come and, like they would like to do, fund defense through September 30th, and then whatever crumbs are left over go to things like Head Start and Meals on Wheels and education and health care. And that's what we've been fighting for. Paul Ryan won't live up to his previous agreement because of his caucus, and because of that, that's really what we're fighting for, is to make sure that we don't have devastating cuts to programs that actually help people. And unfortunately, that kind of got lost in the media debate. You had the Republicans very disingenuously saying that we wanted to let illegals into the country and we didn't want to fund the military, and yet, you saw we had resolutions that said fund the military if we're in a shutdown, and they won't even take them up. So, it's hard because I think Chuck Schumer was dealt a 2, a 4, a 5, a 9 of clubs, and then he had 1 jack, and we're expecting him to come up with a good hand. I wish things would have turned out differently, but I know he was in a tough place to begin with.
Yeah, well said. Those are my questions. Anything you wanted to announce, or should we pick up calls?
I think we can take in calls. I just think, really, this FBI MO, we're going to put some information on in a bit. We're fully for releasing this, because I think when people see this, Devin Nunes has no credibility, right? He is removed from the investigation because of, remember, all the antics he did one night. Mm-hmm. He also jumped out of a car, and his staff didn't know where he went. And then the next day, he's like, aha, I have this memo I have to give the White House that he picked up at the White House the day before. I mean, this guy has, makes clowns look serious. And now he's the guy who's behind all of this. And they're saying release it, and they can release it. The president's even saying the committee can release it. And so they're trying to build this hype to something that when you get it, you're going to go home and go, I don't have any Betamax tapes. What do I do? Right. So I just think, we really have to make sure people understand what this hype is. Yeah, there's no there. Thank you for that. David in Greenfield, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan, and Happy New Year.
Thank you,
I wanted to talk about the DACA bill coming up by the Democratic senators in early February. I think that they should play some three-dimensional chess and add border funding to the bill so they can make it a must-pass thing for Republicans, and they would look bad voting against it. I think it would also have an added benefit of helping Democratic senators in these Republican states get reelected in this upcoming election in November.
Yeah, I mean, David, what you're saying is basically what's been happening, right? We had several months ago the agreement that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer had with the president that he blew up was not the wall at all, but some additional roads along the border, some use of drones for protecting where you don't have, the ability to see what's happening at the border. But in exchange, he broke something that wasn't, needing to have any changes. DACA has worked well, although arguably we should have actually real pathways to citizenship for people. But in the meantime, it's worked well, and he changed it. So they had agreements on those things, and then the president went back once he had a rally and, got together with all the Trumpites who, want to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. And then Chuck Schumer, I think, tried to strategically do what you said. He said, okay, fine, let's put the wall on the table. Let's talk about it. And then still the president wouldn't take yes for an answer because they're not serious about fixing this. I think my personal opinion, what happened was they know how badly they're doing. That Wisconsin election was, just like what we've seen across the country where we've got these huge turnouts of Dems and not Republicans. And at the end of the day, I think this was a Hail Mary for them to try to change their polling.
Very interesting. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls right after this. Congressman Pocan's website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And be sure to say thanks for being on the program today. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Mark Pocan, right after this. And welcome back. Michael in Silver Springs, Nevada. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Mr. Spokane. I wanted to start off, we had talked about Pell Grants, and I really felt your empathy. I wanted to thank you for that. My question for you today is it possible in the United States to use ballot initiatives to reestablish the fairness doctrine to broadcasting? Because I really think this is a tool that we need to fix this from the bottom up.
There's no question. That is something that I think would make our politics and our policy much better. I don't know if a ballot initiative, we don't have them in all areas. In a place like Wisconsin, you can have an advisory one if the Republicans in charge of the legislature decide to have it. Some areas, have an easier ability to do it. But I think, just bringing that issue back into the debate, I think would be helpful given where, unfortunately, we are with how the media works and how, we don't get coverage for, I think, facts anymore, thanks to the president.
Yeah. Let's see here. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. Thank you, Tom, for all you do, and Congressman Pocan, too. My question today is, what is happening in the budget with Social Security, and why don't we hear more from the Democrats about Social Security and Medicare cuts the Republicans are trying to put through?
Well, so I think one of the things, again, when we talk about this parity is we want to make sure that the discretionary funding that we have out there, the non-defense part, doesn't see all the cuts, because I think that's what many in the Republican Party would like. And it could affect things maybe not so directly on Social Security, because I think they're going to come back for that in a separate way than trying to deal with the deficit. But it could affect some of the funding that provides people help navigating through Social Security and some of the administrative sides and other things. So we certainly know that every budget Paul Ryan has put out when he was budget chair, or not, I don't know if I could say every budget, but many budgets have gone towards privatizing Social Security and voucherizing Medicare, and we know outright cutting on Medicaid. And again, those are three programs I think that are very popular. So we do bring it up as part of the conversation, although, again, I think what we need to do right now, we'll get this funding bill to take care of, but you're going to see the Republicans come back, and we saw Paul Ryan already do it days after he passed the giant tax cut for his donors, and all of a sudden, after he blew a $2 billion plus hole with interest into the deficit, suddenly say we've got to address the deficit, and that's exactly where they're going to start going. And I think they're going to start with disability funding and Social Security, and watch for that.
Yeah, isn't this? We have a little less than a minute here, and I'd love to hear your riff on this. Isn't this a perfect example? The fact that I believe the Republican budget that they proposed so far has an over almost $500 million cut in funding for the Social Security Administration, for the people who answer the phones and run the computers and make everything work, so that our experience when we walk into a Social Security office is going to be long, tedious, drawn out, horrible. And the American public is going to say, you know, this system is broken. Let's hand it all over to Wells Fargo.
This is their backdoor way of dealing with everything, right? Exactly. You're exactly right, Tom. Also, you know, with the Affordable Care Act, death by 1,000 cuts. At some point, it's not going to work anymore. They're going to say, see, it doesn't work. But, you know, you don't outright get rid of it because they can't. It's not popular to go after Social Security. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, and a shame it is. I mean, this is a moral and political crime against our nation. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
For the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Kim in Springfield, Massachusetts, listening to WHMT. Hey, Kim, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. First of all, I hope you're feeling better, Congressman Pocan.
I am, Kim. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear it. Okay, so my question is, my son is a teacher, and he signed up for the federal Public Service Loan Forgiveness Act, and I've heard something called the Prosper Act, H.R. 4508, which is looking to do away with that program, as well as some other federal funding for higher education. And I was wondering if I think I had heard it passed in the House. I'm not sure where it stands right now, and I wondered if you knew if this was something that my son would be grandfathered in still, or if this is a permanent for everybody in this program, if they're not going to get this forgiveness loan.
Sure, Kim. Let me give you the good news and the bad news. The bad news is, yes, this is a priority. They have a bill out there. It's been discussed in the process of higher education reauthorization and tax bills. It's something that they don't see as a priority. That's the bad news. The good news is the Republicans are incompetent in running government. So the odds of them being able to move that and get it passed through the Senate, because the 60-vote rule, will be much more difficult. But that doesn't mean, you shouldn't be calling your members of Congress and the Senate and pushing to make sure that it never does get thrown into an omnibus or thrown into a higher education reauthorization or anything else. So be vigilant, because there are many in the party who want to do that. But the good news right now is they're just not capable of doing a whole lot because of multiple levels of incompetency.
Bill in Sierra Blanca, Texas, listening on KABQ. Bill, you're on the air.
Hi. How are you doing, Tom? I had a quick comment question for Congressman Pocan. I live in far west Texas on the Rio Grande, and we are at the fourth-generation farm and ranch. This is where the wall, the big, beautiful wall that Mr. Trump would put across our land, taking hundreds and hundreds of acres by eminent domain. It's actually 5 miles of river frontage on the Rio Grande. And I'm appalled that Democrats such as Chuck Schumer and Representative Gutierrez, who I once admired, would sell us down the river in a failed attempt that wasn't even productive to get DACA and for the Dreamers, who I support. I'm half Mexican-American myself. It's an issue important to me, but I think the Democratic Party as a whole, not you, Congressman Pocan, has been failing us. It's very sad that our lands would be taken by eminent domain and taken hundreds of, probably 200 yards away from the river, making a no man's land and ruining it for an ineffective wall.
Yeah, so Bill, I think this is one where what the corporate media has put out there and what I can tell you from being out there, and I personally talked to Luis Gutierrez about this, is a case where I think the media is portraying a game of checkers, and we had some people playing a game of chess. And I'm not saying it was successful in the end, although I do think we got closer to having a real resolution around DACA, which we all are still fighting for. But I think that what Chuck Schumer did is he put it on the table to show that the president wasn't serious about negotiating, wouldn't take yes for an answer. And I think he did that, but I don't think that the corporate media really picked it up that way. I don't think he wound up landing the punch that he was trying to. I don't think that there was a serious saying, okay, we give in, we think there should be a wall. I think there is still a lot of opposition to a wall for many good reasons, and we assume that there will be a lot of delays through lawsuits and other things if it ever did wind up getting that far. So I can tell you specifically, because I did talk to Luis Gutierrez, I don't think his values have changed a bit on this. I think we're just trying to be at the point of strategy. How do you make sure 700,000 or 800,000 people aren't negatively impacted right now, and how serious are they really about trying to find a solution to anything? And unfortunately, this president has been just about impossible to negotiate, because you get an answer and then his staff come out and said what he really meant, and that's not negotiation. So it's not quite as it was portrayed, I can just tell you from being on the inside, and I think there is some strategic thinking going on that would still be where you and I stand on this issue.
1 minute to the break. Lynn in Detroit, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Hopefully a quick question.
Well, it's not that quick, but I'll try and make it quick. My question is, why are the Democrats negotiating with the Republicans at all? The Republicans created this budget mess by making budget cuts and tax cuts to the rich. By negotiating with the Republicans on how to split the baby and deciding on what gets funded and what does not get funded, the Democrats are assuming responsibility, and they're going to end up getting blamed. So, for example, if they fund DACA but don't fund something else, like emergency funding for Puerto Rico or CHIP or some other health program, the Democrats are going to get blamed because the Republicans are going to say, you made the choice. So why are just let them?
Yeah, I can answer it, Lynn. I can answer the question for you.
Let's pick this, Congressman. Let's pick up your answer on the other side of the break, if that's all right with you.
Sure, no worries.
Unless you've got it in 10 seconds, but
no, let's do it after.
Okay, great. We're hitting the break here at the bottom of the hour. It's Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program for the hour. You can find him, all the information about him over at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this.
We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is Chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas.
not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our fourth billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our fifth billion only 13 years, 1987. And our sixth billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori.
And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold.
Back, Congressman Mark Pocan on the line, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Congressman Pocan, you had a caller just before the break, for people who might have just tuned in, who was basically saying, why should Democrats even negotiate with Republicans? You're basically giving credibility to the positions that they're taking. And I would toss in another question that I had intended to ask you when we first started the program here, which was last night Bernie Sanders did a town hall meeting on Medicare. Medicare for All, the first Medicare for All town hall meeting, nationally televised. It was not on any of the big television networks. It was on a series of smaller networks, the Young Turks and a bunch of others, plus on Facebook and Twitter. In fact, most of it was happening on Facebook, but literally over 1 million people. That's higher ratings than any of the cable news channels got last night. Bernie had. And there was not a single word about it anywhere. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, too. Anyhow.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me take Lynn's question from Michigan first. I think this the basic facts of the math of how something's going to have to pass means the Democrats have to be involved, and that's why they're negotiating. In the House, you can't pass a budget with the Republicans because the Tea Party will never vote for it, at least something that can pass out of the Senate. In the Senate, you have the 60-vote rule. So ultimately, for something to happen, they're going to have to get Democratic support, which means they actually have to negotiate with us, as in the past things have happened. Right now, just this new era, they're not quite sure how to proceed and not piss off the Tea Party in their caucus, and it's been harder for them to navigate. But at the end of the day, nothing will pass without Democratic votes, just due to the rules we have and the math that exists. Tom, to your question, you're right. I mean, there's been almost no coverage. And, last night I did a little event with Randy Bryce, who's running against Paul Ryan in Janesville, in Paul Ryan's hometown. And we had 150, 200 people show up. And we brought the conversation again to Medicare for All. This is something that has wide popular support among people, especially as they're doing a death by 1,000 cuts to the Affordable Care Act. Most people just think the easiest solution would be just to do what every other westernized country does, is make sure that we all have access to health care, and that should be a no-brainer. So, I think the fact that, Bernie's doing it, in the House, I like to remind people the Medicare for All bill has over 60% of the House Democrats are sponsors of that bill. That is clearly where the momentum is. It's just the corporate media hasn't caught up with where everyone else is at.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. Well, my question is also Medicare. And I was wondering, Representative Pocan, have you sat down with anybody to run the numbers? People contribute 1.45% to Medicare. And if you're running a business and you have to continue to help pay for an employee's health care to subsidize these CEOs so they can be happy, a handful of CEOs across the country have to be happy, how can you get this information to the public and wake up how many representatives own businesses that would be better off if they did not have to pay health insurance companies to keep their business open?
Yeah, Norma, it's a great point, and I know Tom and I have had this conversation a number of times because we're both small business owners. This is a huge expense for responsible business owners who provide health insurance for their employees because it's the right thing to do. But honestly, if the government, if it was taken care of, you had a single-payer system, you would be more competitive. A car made in Canada across from Michigan costs less for them to make because of health insurance, because it's provided for people instead of having to pay that out. In fact, I think the fact we had was the cost of steel. Healthcare is more than the cost of steel in a car in the United States. So there's no question it's one of the, I think, the most positive arguments we can put out there for it. But, again, with this Congress, I don't expect it to move, but the people are there, and it's a great issue for us to continue to organize and energize people on.
David, listening on WGRN in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman.
Hi,
this
David.
is my rare opportunity to talk directly to a congressman. I feel that the Democrats need to get organized. The big thing they need to work on is cutting that defense budget, which is killing domestic spending. And that was something they should have shut down the government on. The Democrats seem to be split when they shouldn't be. The Democrats should be working on splitting the Republicans, who were split over that NASA warrantless wiretapping thing. There was a certain Freedom Caucus that voted against that, but then Democrats voted for it. So I think we need to get the Democrats in line, tell them what the score is, and get them to support domestic programs that are important, and bring back the Constitution, please.
Yeah, so David, I mean, I'll agree with you on FISA. I was disappointed that we didn't have Democrats all stand in together, although I think the vast majority of us did. I think it might have been 45 people. I could be wrong on that, but the number that didn't. But I'll tell you, when it comes to the budget, I think we are together. The main thing that we are fighting for budgetarily is to keep the agreement that Paul Ryan had with Patty Murray previously. That was you have parity between defense and non-defense. Because the problem is right now they want to put more money into defense and then give the crumbs that are left to education and health care and Head Start and Meals on Wheels and all the rest of the programs. So we're trying to fight for those programs right now, and I think Democrats are very unified on that. Now, I completely agree, David, on the defense budget. Progressive Caucus puts out a budget that does trim that down, and that is where part of the debate should definitely be. But right now, with them in the majority of the House, in the Senate, and the White House, maintaining that funding for education, healthcare, and all the other things is something I think you have a common bond among all Democrats going into the funding debate.
Carolyn, listening to WCPT in Chicago. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Carolyn?
That's you.
Congressman, I would like to ask you and the other Democrats to change the language and change the messaging. The Democrats too often follow the Republicans. All we heard was illegal, illegal, illegal DACA. And that sent chills down legal Americans who are working, and they see in their, the roads need fixing, their schools are cut back, their medical care, etc. Instead of reacting to their language, I would love to see them change the language and speak not to the 800 million or million so DACA, but the more than 200-300 million Americans who are paying taxes and seeing everything that they need being diminished, whether it's the schools, whether it's the roads, whether it's medical care, etc. The second point is, please challenge Pinocchio President number 45 when he always says things hurt the military. Somebody needs to stand up and say, well, how does DACA hurt the military? He throws up the military every time something comes up. If the guys are taking a knee at a football game, this hurts the military. Change the language and challenge him. Thank you for being there, and thank you for fighting. And please, as someone said earlier, let's get back to the Constitution.
Yeah, Carolyn, I think you bring up some really good points. We're arguing for what you just said, the funding for education and for Head Start and for Meals on Wheels and for health care and all the things that were the non-defense funding. But the Republicans are so much better about saying one thing over and over and over in unison. They said that we were trying to let illegals into the country, which, again, is ridiculous because people in DACA already here. And DACA itself has, I think the last poll I saw was 89% support. It's off the charts. But they did a good job of lying about what the path was. The other thing they did well that you brought up in your second point is saying that we wanted to hurt the military by not funding the military. Well, we put proposals out there to fund the military, and they wouldn't take them up. So again, they're such hypocrites, but I will give them credit. They get a point out there, and they all are on message saying it. And I think we need to do a better job because we were fighting for the very things you talked about, and yet I agree, much of what I watched in the corporate media during those 3 days of the shutdown didn't articulate what we were doing, and yet they had a nice, succinct message.
Yeah. Christine, listening on Sirius XM in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Christine? No Christine. Let's try Arthur, listening on KBCS in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Arthur, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking the call, Tom. I'd like to ask the congressman what all the secrecy around the Hastert rule is. What's with that? The Democrats have a prohibition about talking about that because they want to reserve that option for themselves when they're in the majority. It's pretty much a fact that the Senate couldn't come to an agreement because they couldn't get something agreed upon that would pass the majority in the House. So could you talk about that, explain to Tom's audience what the Hastert rule is?
Sure.
And
we just have 30 seconds here, Arthur, so I'm going to leave it at that. Congressman?
Sure. I talk about it often. Hastert rule is named after former Speaker Denny Hastert. Paul Ryan agreed to it when he became Speaker, which empowers the Tea Party. It says you have to have 218 people in the Republican conference to support something to put it out there, and it is the problem that we have. Let's face it, Denny Hastert now is inmate number whatever. It would be a good time to get rid of the Hastert rule, but there is nothing about Democrats ever wanting to have a rule like that. We haven't had it, and really, we do need to talk about it more so people understand the damage it's causing.
Yeah. It's basically that if they can't pass the legislation exclusively with Republican votes, they're not even going to bring it to the floor. Is that right? Is that a simple way of saying it?
You have to have 218, which is the magic number.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls with Congressman Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Is it Reza in Hot Springs National Park, Arkansas? Reza, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman, regarding action of Congressman Muniz to undermine the House Judiciary investigation, caused Mueller to investigate this as a part of a conspiracy?
Well, Reza, there's no question that what Devin Nunes is attempting to do, although I think, in my opinion, rather pathetically, is to create a memo that he and a couple staff people put together, act like there's some fact and record, and then say, release the memo. It's just like when he picked up something from the White House grounds one night, the next day say, aha, I have this document I have to hand up over to the White House. He got it there the day before. It's as ridiculous. In this case, he wrote a memo. Now they're asking for it to be released when they wrote the thing, and it's not a committee memo. And, I would argue, I agree, release it, because I've read it. And release the information that they gathered that put it together, because when people look at it, you're going to see this is one more attempt to distract people from the very serious, very real investigation on Russian collusion with the Trump administration. So you're 100% right on what they're trying to do with this, and that's why I'm joining the voices saying release the document, because if we do, we can all see how pathetic their attempt to try to create the subterfuge has been.
Interesting. Joe in Cartersville, Georgia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. Earlier you were talking about the FBI, and as a retired firefighter and union member, there's an FBI Agents Association or something, and to blow up this smoke screen that the White House is using, that the rank and file is demoralized, they ought to be able to take a vote of confidence in their leadership and pull the rug out from under them, under the White House on this smoke screen.
Yeah, Joe, a great point, although then they would argue that that just proves their case. I think this is one of the stories, again, that got a little attention the last couple of days, but my senator, Ron Johnson, said that there's a secret society within the FBI that has been going after Trump. And, you know, I remember another Wisconsin senator named Joe McCarthy who was pretty good at doing that. I mean, this is getting to a point where they are so desperate to sidetrack this investigation. It keeps getting closer and closer, and that rope is tightening, that they are now trying to find anything, and they're going after now an institution like the FBI. I just find this fascinating, and I think this is foreshadowing more and more where I think this investigation is going to prove. But it is amazing at the length they'll go to try to stop it.
Yeah. Denny. We have a minute to the break. You're on with Congressman Denny in Berwyn, Illinois. You're on with Congressman Pocan.
Okay, thank you. I'm a veteran, and I have a few of my veteran friends listening to me, and I have a friend of mine who lives in Germany. Now, sir, I was a Democrat. I'm in the Green Party now for a reason. I don't buy the Russian story. I don't see the proof. And I know Mrs. Clinton, when I saw New York court cases, admit that they ripped off the election from Bernie. Now, look, I'm getting tired. The American people are getting tired of the Russian story. The Russians aren't doing anything any more than we are, and we're going around killing innocent people every day.
Okay, Denny, we're hitting a break here. Congressman, you want to respond to that on the other side of the break?
I can respond right now. He's wrong.
Okay. All right. And you would know. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Our Middays with Mark segment. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for listening to WCPT.
Thank you. Thank you to talk. I wanted to ask, now that North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Florida got to redistrict, who brings it up in your state? Does the Democrats have to put it in front of the court about gerrymandering? Because let's be honest, when you guys get all three branches, can you write a law that outlaws gerrymandering in this country? Because the Republicans will never see the House once it's gone. Can you help me on that?
Yeah, so I can tell you that we've seen that now in several states, and it can be initiated through lawsuit by, I think, multiple parties, depending, again, on where it's happening. But at the federal level, I mean, we absolutely, without question, should try to move towards the system that a state like Iowa has. I know California and a couple others have something similar, but Iowa has a citizens panel drawing the lines. You take it out of the hands of politicians, so you're not asking politicians to pick their voters. It's supposed to be the other way around. And I think anyone who thinks that they should wait till we get the majorities and game the system themselves is woefully ignorant, and it's something that we really need to push for a fair, independent redistricting system across the country if you really want to have any kind of restoration of democracy.
Steve in Perrysville, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I got a question here. I watched the news early this morning, and they said something about some kids getting killed in another school shooting, and it sounds to me like it's not important because it was a handgun, and like 2 of them died, and about 12 of them got wounded.
Yeah, 3 in critical condition right now.
Oh, really?
So your question, Steve, for the congressman?
I wonder why I haven't heard any more about it.
Yeah, I mean, well,
this is by the way, Congressman, this is the 11th school shooting this year.
That's what I was just going to bring up.
I'm sorry.
I saw that article just today, so I think there still is some talking about it. The real problem we have is all of these shootings have been desensitized, period. So, you know, often I'll go back to Congress. I assume we'll have some sort of a moment of silence on the floor again, and then we'll go back to having moments of inaction on gun violence. And until this becomes an issue that captures more people in the electorate who put pressure on their elected officials, NRA and their money and the gun manufacturers are going to continue to win on this issue. So we just have to, you know, get upset enough and organized enough that we make this an issue that they can't just respond that way to.
Yeah. George in Santee, California. George, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I have a question about my union pension. I got a letter yesterday that said there's a growing pension crisis in America, and that my union is encouraging me to contact my senators and my congressmen to express my support for legislation that would protect our pensions without cutting our benefits. Could you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, George, so there's I mean, first of all, your union is completely right, and it's not just in the multi-employer pensions, it's across the board in people's savings for retirement. It's a real issue we need to have far more attention put onto. I do think that there is a package, a bill put together that's trying to address the problems that we've had with, like, central states in the fund, especially the unions are in that fund, to try to make sure that people don't lose 40-60% of their pension, which is quite possible otherwise. So, but I think there's a broader issue around multi-employer pension funds that, should there be an omnibus bill, I think that could likely be part of the conversation, because it's also the mine workers and others who are negatively affected right now, and we have to have some resolution.
James in Wichita, Kansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Good.
I don't want to be the downer guy, but I can't ever figure out why is it always so important for 800,000 people who are here not legally, opposed to the African-American descendants of slaves. Y'all are treating DACA like they're just, oh, we just got to do this. But when black folks ask for reparations or ask for anything, we don't get nothing. And then we sitting there electing this guy down there in Alabama, and we got hookworms. We got lead in our water. Y'all don't do, it's just, like I said, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to say I hate y'all, but I just get tired of voting and nothing getting done for us. You know, everybody so happy about gay marriage and all that. Well, again, off of the backs of black people. Again, this stuff is off, civil rights is off of, that civil rights action was off of the back of black leaders who died and were murdered. We didn't see homosexuals being hung. We don't see Mexicans being hung. You go back in your history books, you see black folks being burnt down by hoses and hung in trees and burnt on stacks of wood. But again, there's nobody fighting for us.
James, we just have 30 seconds. Your point is very eloquent.
Is a very good one.
But we're almost out of time. I'd like Congressman Pocan to respond.
And we're out of time too. Black folks are.
Yep, Congressman.
Yeah, James, I would say I don't think we need to make it an either or. I mean, there's no question. Part of why we have a problem in Flint, Michigan, is because it's an African American community, and people haven't given it the attention they needed to in state government in Michigan. I think the difference with DACA is these are people who often have come not on their own. You know, they came as a 6-month-old, a 5-year-old, and now they're about to be deported to a country they don't know and they may not speak the language of, and that's why there's immediate crisis on that issue.
Yeah. Although clearly there are immediate crises all across our country as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I would argue, again, picking and choosing who is being hurt doesn't help. It should be the unity of multiple.
I agree. This is the old. They're going to take your job sales pitch that white people were told about black people 50 years ago. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University, we're reading from what is apparently Donald Trump's second favorite book. His number one, according to his first wife, as I recall, was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which was on his bed next to his, or on his bedstand next to his bed for years. But when he was asked by reporters his favorite book, he said P.T. Barnum's The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money. So I thought, hey, let's check this out. This is from the introduction. Those who really desire to attain an independence, but have only to set their minds upon it and adopt the proper means, as they do in regard to any other object which they wish to accomplish, and the thing is easily done. But however easy it may be found to make money, I have no doubt many of my hearers will agree it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth is, as Dr. Ben Franklin truly says, as plain as the road to the mill. It consists simply in expending less than we earn. That seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of the genial Dickens, puts the case in a strong light when he says that to have an income of 20 pounds per annum and spend 20 pounds and 6 pence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only 20 pounds and spend but 19 pounds and 6 pence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my readers may say, we understand this. This is economy, and we know economy is wealth. We know we can't eat our cake and keep it also. Yet I beg to say that perhaps more cases of failure arise from mistakes on this point than almost any other. The fact is, many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misapprehended, and people go through life without properly comprehending what that principle is. One person says, I have an income of so much, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he gets something ahead and I fall short. Why is it? I know all about economy. Well, he thinks he does, but he does not. There are many who think that economy consists in saving cheese parings and candle ends. Keep in mind, this was written in the late 1900s. In cutting off 2 pence from the laundress's bill and doing all sorts of little mean, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. The misfortune is also that this class of persons let their economy apply in only one direction. They fancy that they are so wonderfully economical in saving a halfpenny where they ought to spend 2 pence that they think they can afford to squander in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one might stop overnight at almost any farmer's house in the agricultural districts to get a very good supper. But after supper, he might attempt to read in the sitting room and would find it impossible with insufficient light from just one candle. The hostess, seeing his dilemma, would say, it is rather difficult to read here in the evenings. The proverb said, you must have a ship at sea in order to be able to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on extra occasions. Those extra occasions occur perhaps twice a year. In this way, the good woman saves $5, $6, or $10 in that time, but the information which might be derived from having an extra candle would, of course, far outweigh a ton of candles. But the trouble does not end there. Feeling that she is so economical in tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to go frequently to the village and spend $20 or $30 for ribbons and furloughs, many of which are not necessary. This false economy may frequently be seen in men of business, and in those instances, it often runs to paper writing. You find good businessmen who save all the old envelopes and scraps and would not tear a new sheet of paper if they could avoid it for the world. This is all very well. They may in this way save $5 or $10 a year, but being so economical only in note paper, they think they can afford to waste time, to have expensive parties, and to drive their own carriages. This is an illustration of Dr. Franklin's, quote, saving at the spigot and wasting at the bunghole, or penny wise and pound foolish. Punch, and speaking of this one idea class of people, says they are like the man who bought a penny herring for his family's dinner and then hired a coach and 4 to take it home. I never knew a man who succeeded to succeed by practicing this kind of economy. True economy consists in always making the income exceed the outgo. Wear the old clothes a little longer if necessary. Dispense with a new pair of gloves. Mend the old dress. Live on plainer food if need be. So that under all circumstances, unless some unforeseen accident occurs, there will be a margin in favor of the income. Penny here, a dollar there, placed at interest, goes on accumulating, and in this way, the real desire is attained. It requires some training, perhaps, to accomplish this economy, but once used to it, you will find there is more satisfaction in rational saving than in irrational spending. Here's a recipe which I recommend. I have found it to work an excellent cure for extravagance and especially for mistaken economy. When you find that you have no surplus at the end of the year and yet have a good income, I advise you to take a few sheets of paper and form them into a book and mark down every item of expenditure. Posted every day or week in 2 columns, one headed necessities, the other comforts, and the other headed luxuries. And you will find that the latter column will be double, triple, and frequently 10 times greater than the former. The real comfort of life costs but a small portion of what most of us can earn. Dr. Franklin said, "It is the eyes of others and not our own eyes which ruin us. If all the world were blind except myself, I should not care for fine clothes and furniture. It is the fear of what Mrs. Grundy may say that keeps the noses of most worthy families to the grindstone. In America, many persons like to repeat, we are all free and equal. But it is a great mistake in more senses than one. That we are born free and equal is a glorious truth in one sense, yet we are not all born equally rich, and we never shall be." So anyhow, the book is The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money by P.T. Barnum. It's actually a pretty good book. The book is...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Last week we had a caller into the program who was lamenting the fact that, well, or maybe I was actually, lamenting the fact that it can be a real challenge for many people, young people who don't have a lot of resources and don't own a car, older people who maybe can't drive any longer, poorer people, people who use public transportation. It's just, it can be a real challenge to get your voter ID. And I was talking about how, well, Acorn used to do that, but the Republicans destroyed that, along with Fox News and Mr. Whackjob, the guy with the phony videos. And then somebody called in and said, no, there's an organization that is organizing this thing to, have people volunteer to drive other people to get their ID so that they can vote. And it's called voteriders.org. And I checked out the website. I was just blown away by it. I did not know about it. And Kathleen Unger, who is the president and CEO of Vote Riders, voteriders, RIDERS.org, is on the line with us. Kathleen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so very much, Tom. I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you and your wonderful audience.
Well, thank you. Tell us about how Vote Riders came about, how long you've been around, and specifically what you do.
So Tom, Vote Riders, and thank you for spelling it, it's VOTERIDERS, is a 501c3 national nonpartisan nonprofit that I founded in early 2012. It's the leading organization focused exclusively on voter ID. So we inform and help citizens to secure their voter ID, and we inspire and support organizations and local volunteers and communities to sustain voter ID education and assistance efforts. And importantly, we concentrate especially on helping voters to obtain the documents required by a state voter ID law.
Yeah. Kathleen, your phone is not doing so well. We're going to try listening to your Skype audio and see if it sounds better. So basically what you're there for people who need to get ID. And as a 501c3, obviously you work on donations, but also donations of time and effort. I mean, how do people interact with you?
Through our helpline and through our we have a toll-free helpline, which is 844-338-8743. People connect with us on our website, voteriders.org, and they email us, and through, importantly, all of these wonderful organizations that reach out to us and that we reach out to. It's an outrage that Americans are losing their fundamental right to vote, either because they don't have, they're among the tens of millions of Americans without a current government-issued photo ID, or they're just confused and intimidated by these complicated and stringent voter ID laws, because it's not enough to register to vote in 2/3 of the states, and Vote Riders is the solution to all this.
Mm-hmm. And if somebody wanted to, in their own community or in their own neighborhood, wanted to do, something like what you're doing, is it appropriate for them to talk about affiliating with you, or join it? Do you have local groups? Is it how does that work?
So we'd love for people to come to voteriders.org, sign up for our periodic updates, and we are organizing our volunteer plans. So we'd love for people to contact us through our website, voteriders.org, to volunteer. There'll be our plans that are in the works are to where they can engage in phone banking and text banking, canvassing, providing rides to government offices, as you mentioned, researching and writing, photographing citizens with their voter ID. And we'd love it if your audience would encourage their friends to join them by, again, signing up at on our homepage for voter ID news, and to volunteer if they're interested.
Wow.
If there's an issue that people care about, then it really does matter that those who agree with you can vote regardless of where they live. So this is so important to make sure that everybody can vote if they want to.
Amen. Thomas Paine called the vote the beating heart of democracy. And, it is so great that you're doing this work. Kathleen Unger, the CEO and president of voteriders.org. The Twitter handle is @VoteRiders, VOTERIDERS, as in a ride to the vote, or to ride to your ID, @VoteRiders. Kathleen, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Great talking with you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. VoteRiders.org, once again, is the website. So there is that. I've got a geeky science for you. This is, we've got to dig up our geeky science music, and get that going again. This just from Science Daily. Just yesterday they published this. It's out of the University of California at Los Angeles. And twice daily supplements of curcumin. Now, curcumin is the active ingredient in turmeric, which is that yellow spice that is used to make curries and things like that. The active ingredient is curcumin, and what they found is that daily consumption of a certain form of curcumin, the substance that gives Indian curry its bright color, improved memory and mood in people with mild age-related memory loss. So this is lovers of Indian food, give yourself a second helping. Daily consumption of a certain, well, I just read that. The research published online January 19th in the American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry examined the effects of an easily absorbed curcumin supplement on memory performance in people without dementia, as well as curcumin's potential impact on the microscopic plaques and tangles in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. And, they know from previous studies that curcumin is an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. In fact, it's one of the ingredients in Relief Factor, for example, and a botanical product that's sold to reduce pain because it's anti-inflammatory. Dr. Gary Small, director of geriatric psychiatry at UCLA's Longevity Center, and the geriatric psychiatry division of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA, as the study's first author, he said, quote, "Exactly how curcumin exerts its effects is not certain, but it may be due to its ability to reduce brain inflammation, which has been linked to both Alzheimer's disease and major depression." And this study, it's a relatively small study. It was 40 adults between the ages of 50 and 90 years old who had memory complaints, mild memory complaints. And they were randomly assigned to either take a placebo or 80 milligrams of curcumin twice a day for 18 months, a year-and-a-half long study. They were all tested, their memory, their cognitive abilities before the study and at 6-month intervals, and 30 of the volunteers underwent PET scans, brain scans, to determine the level of amyloid and tau in their brains. These are the proteins that destroy the brain under Alzheimer's. And the people who took, reading from the report here, the people who took curcumin experienced significant improvements in their memory and attention abilities, while the subjects who received the placebo did not. In memory tests, people taking curcumin improved by 28% over 18 months. Their memory didn't stay the same, it actually got better by 28% over a year-and-a-half period. Those taking curcumin also had mild improvements in mood, and the brain PET scans showed significantly less amyloid and tau signals in the amygdala and hypothalamus than those who took placebos. And those are the regions of the brain that control memory and emotional functions. So pretty amazing stuff. Eat your curry, at the very least. Anyhow, there's a bunch of news, political news going on. I want to get to that, too, as we continue. Plus, we'll be picking up your phone calls. A lot on the table today. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Ordering me some curcumin here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dan in Huntsville, Alabama. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks. Well, Democrats have a lot of really smart people, creative, sorry, I'm elliptical there. But the leadership, I feel like there's a couple areas that drives me nuts that they're horrible at. And that's language and negotiating. Language, Obamacare. I hear this term Democrat Party. They slip these things out, and then I hear Democrats. I say Democratic. I know it seems like a little thing, but...
Oh, it's actually a fairly big thing, Dan. That goes back to Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy, when he was doing his communist witch hunt thing, referred to the Democratic Party as the Democrat Party, and he said, and always emphasized the rat, and which he used to do. That was adopted by partisan Republicans. Most of them kind of embarrassed to do it, but it got kind of widespread in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and then when right-wing hate radio took off with Limbaugh kicking off his show in 1987, it has gone full viral within the on the Republic side. To abbreviate
I think these things really matter, especially with uninformed people, and there's no nuance.
You're right. There's no such thing as the Democrat Party. There is not. Thomas Jefferson named it the Democratic Republican Party, and in the 1820s they dropped the word Republican, and it's always been the Democratic Party.
So I think Democrats should push back on that. When they're getting interviewed or whatever, stop them. And Obamacare, same thing. Correct them. That's not what it's called either. So one more thing real quick. Negotiating. This negotiating, if I'd have gone to the DACA, we got lots of lawyers in the Democratic Party, I would have said, okay, here's what's on the table. We got CHIP, DACA, and you reinstate the Obamacare mandate or walk. You don't go negotiating with the two things you absolutely need. I don't know. It's like they didn't want to win. Right. You come with more than what the Obamacare mandate is really important. It affects millions of people. It's a worthwhile thing. They should have gone to the table with that. And maybe they wouldn't have got that, but they'd come back with the two things that they really had to have.
Yeah.
They suck at that. I just feel either they're not trying and they're not listening to the base and these creative, smart people that are out there that they have, or there's ulterior motives. There's one of the two, to me.
Well, I think the problem, Dan, is the legacy of Al Fromm and Bill Clinton, is the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC, then it was called the Third Way, and Harold Ford Jr. and those guys. And basically their bright idea back in 1992 was, the Democratic Party, the unions have been so devastated by Ronald Reagan, and things like tort reform have undercut the trial lawyers, who were the principal sources of funding for the Democratic Party nationwide, that, we've got to go someplace else. So let's go to the clean industries, banks, tech, internet, stuff like that. and get in bed with them. And so the problem that you've got is about half of the Democratic Party is running on, small contributions and local things and, the kind of Bernie-crats, of just solid policy. And the other half of the Democratic Party is, the Joe Manchins of the world. They're still doing the bidding of their large donors. And that is very often in, contrast with the will, basically, of the Democratic base. And it makes it really hard for the party to uniquely message, to have single-focused messages when you've got people in the party who are saying, oh, no, we can't do Medicare for all because that's going to hurt the profits of the hospital industry, or that's going to hurt the profits of the pharmaceutical industry, and they give me a lot of money. And, the example, obviously, is Cory Booker, just recently. So I think that's the big problem, Dan, and that will be solved if we can get money out of politics. And that, frankly, will help the Republican Party as well. Dan, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, the numbers are in for 2017. And the headline over at Newsweek says it all. White supremacists killed 18 people in 2017, double the number of people from 2016. And then when you put that in the context of all extremists killing people, it was 34 in the United States last year. And 18 of them were killed by white supremacists. So more than half of all the basically terror-related murders in the United States last year, more than half of them were done by white supremacists. It seems to me that this is a story that should get a little more coverage. In the past decade, this is the last 10 years, right-wing extremism made up 71% of extremist-related murders, compared to 26%, of murders by Islamic extremists. It's just remarkable. It's just remarkable. The New York Times has a piece this morning. It's by Max Fisher and Amanda Taub. And it's a little video where they point out that, and you can see this over at the New York Times website, they point out that over the last 200 years, we've gone from basically no democracies in the world, or a couple, ours being one of the very first, at the time that the United States became a democracy in 1787, arguably, or even 1776. There were, a few other countries that arguably were democratic, but not many. And then we saw a steady rise up to the Civil War, and then during the Civil War, it kind of dropped down, and then a steady rise up to World War II, and then it kind of dropped down a little bit, and then after World War II, another steady rise, to the point where about half of all the countries in the world are small d democratic. I'm not talking democratic, Republican kind of thing. I'm talking about democracy in a republic. And now we're seeing so many of these democracies backslide into authoritarianism. We have seen it in the Philippines with Duterte. You see it in Russia with Putin. You see it in Turkey with Erdogan. You see it in Hungary with Viktor Orban. It is happening in country after country after country that were formerly highly democratic countries. And we're seeing it in the United States, the rise of this populist authoritarianism that Donald Trump is basically using the same playbook as the people that I just mentioned, who have taken countries that were fundamentally, at their core, had strong democratic institutions. Now, arguably, Russia is the exception to that because there was just that very rapid transition period from the fall of the Soviet Union to modern-day Russia. During that time, there was some considerable democracy for a while, and then the Chicago boys came in with the Milton Friedman and friends. I mean, Friedman was gone, but his acolytes from the Chicago School of Economics, who said, "Oh no, Russia should become an example of a libertarian country, a libertarian state. Let the capitalists run everything," and it kind of turned less, shall we say, less than democratic, small d democratic. We're seeing, and to some extent, you also have, leadership pushing that. But I think that the clearer example of this is probably Hungary, Turkey, and the Philippines, although there's a bunch of other countries too. And so they're asking the question over at the New York Times, what's the problem? Why is it that democracies are starting to fail? And could ours? Is there something fundamentally wrong with democracy? And I would like to answer that question. And I think it's a really important question. And the problem is that the question doesn't include the problem. The problem is that the sales pitch we've been getting from the libertarians, the David Kochs of the world who ran for vice president in 1980 on the libertarian ticket, from the right-wing billionaires, the so-called objectivists, the acolytes of Ayn Rand, Reason Magazine and the Reason Foundation, one of these Ayn Rand groups that somehow, they're always popping up on MSNBC. These are hardcore right-wing cranks who are promoting the idea that capitalism is more important than democracy, that capitalism should drive democracy, that in a capitalist society, the fewer regulations and the fewer limits that you have on the ability of capitalists to influence politics, the better. This is their sales pitch. And that is the rot at the core of these things. In every country that I mentioned, and in the many other countries that are losing democracy or are sliding away from democracy and toward authoritarianism, including the United States, what we see is that the principal force pushing this kind of populism has been the looting, basically, of the working class of the country, the working class responding to being looted by the capitalists with anger, and then you get people stepping into the void, these populist politicians, the Donald Trumps of the world, you get these, the Erdogans of the world, you get these populist politicians stepping into that void and saying, as Donald Trump literally said, I alone can solve this problem. I alone can save you. I will be your defender. I will be the one who fights on behalf of you against those people who are screwing you. When in fact, these phony populists like Donald Trump are the people who are screwing us. And they're doing it by elevating capitalism above democracy. Democracy is a form of governance. Capitalism is an economic system. They are completely different things. And capitalism will, if it's not limited, if it's not regulated, it will corrode, erode, and ultimately destroy democracy. And that's what we're seeing in country after country. Whereas democracy, if it is strong, can actually provide a safe space, a soil in which the roots of regulated capitalism, healthy capitalism, can actually grow. Now, obviously, I'd like to see a whole lot more than just capitalism. I'd like to see co-ops. I'd like, there's a whole lot of other things that can be done. But in my opinion, the Times article is completely missing the boat because they're unwilling to criticize capitalism. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, we'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day. Smartphones are the new quitting smoking, quitting smartphones. More on that after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword, at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea and the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of Capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and John in Cordova, Tennessee. John, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Actually, I was thinking about when you were just talking about the, gosh, oh man, my mind dumped it. But how the white supremacists and the murders they committed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that that Trump and his Republican ilk, they're saying that the Democrats will be, or Charles Schumer or Dick, whatever his name is, Schumer will be responsible for every murder committed by an undocumented.
Right. This is the video that Trump mailed out to millions of his followers, 3 days ago, 4 days ago? I got it.
And so now, by virtue of that, with his own words, then he and the Republican Party, with how they've emboldened white supremacists, that they are directly responsible and accountable for every murder committed by white supremacists and people, whether again, whether it's against a black person, a Muslim, anyone, they are complicit.
Yeah.
And I think if the Democrats would start, and even with the gun violence, from these middle-aged white men, that are out here, they're responsible because they don't want to talk about any type of gun control. They took away or they gave the ability for crazy folks now to be able to go out and buy weapons.
Right.
And so they are responsible for every murder committed by those people, and I think they need to start running some ads, or that needs to be some talking points from the Democrats.
Yeah, I'm with you, John. There is such a stack of horribles. I mean, plus you look at what Brian Zinke is doing with Interior, and you look at what Scott Pruitt is doing over at EPA, and I mean they're actively deconstructing our government. At the same time, they're empowering white supremacists, doing racist dog whistles constantly. And then on top of that, and this is the bizarre part, trying to damage the reputation of our police institutions. Yeah, that the FBI specifically that protect us, and it's like it's crazy. It's just crazy. I'm with you, John. Thank you. Very well said. Brad in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
Two quick things, I hope. Last night, listening to MSNBC or the contributors, they referred to a tax relief built into this CSR, and I was hoping you might know. And the other question is kind of going along with the theme of kind of incompetent Democratic messaging. Why aren't they using the bloviating gifts of Trump and basically say, we'll put in a wall, but you have to do like you promised. You have to get the money from Mexico because you're such a great dealer.
Right.
Why aren't they, they would do that against the Democrats anytime. So those two quick things, if you can address.
I think the Democrats should be introducing legislation to build a wall contingent on funding from Mexico.
Right.
We sure, yeah, go ahead, build a wall, no problem. We will vote to build a wall as soon as Mexico sends the check, and can call him out on it. Yeah. With regard to the tax scam, I don't know, Brad. The continuing resolution that they're talking about to fund the government through February now, or a continuing resolution that might fund the government after February. I don't know what is packed in those. These continuing resolutions tend to be sold to us as everything stays just the same, but typically they throw in a few sweeteners for their favorite lobbyists or for whichever companies own the people who are in leadership, which would be Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan in this case. And I have not had an opportunity to really dig through those continuing resolutions and see what they have snuck in there. But I guarantee you there's stuff in there. And that needs to be on my list of things to do this week. Brad, thanks for the call and thanks for the question. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Oh, give me one. Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Charles, you're on the air. Charles?
Can you hear me?
Right, can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay, good. I'll take your speakerphone. No, you wouldn't believe it, but I thought about this all last night, what you were just saying about corporate greed and corporate influence.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, you know, it's I looked at it like they said we was going into Iraq for WMDs, but really what I thought was, I told you about this before. I said, if you look, Fareed Zakaria did a special on CNN. It was called The Silk Road.
Yep.
Basically, how long it would take to transport goods from China through the Middle East and to Europe. And the only countries that's in the way of you know, big corporations doing something like this to make it a global economy is Iran and Iraq.
Right, and arguably Afghanistan, although Afghanistan, I think, was more the TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline that would feed the General Electric power plants in India.
Exactly,
But, yeah.
and what I'm thinking is, because of this greed, because of this influence of money, I think that's why Donald Trump wanted to run for president, because he wanted to launder money that way, and he knew he could do it because there was so much money in the political system. And the reason why, you know, he was able to broker a deal with the Republicans, because they're actually going to give him what he wanted, and he was going to be the front man for the wall. He's going to be the front man for immigration and the tax cuts. And you know, Robert Mueller is a thorn in his side, but that's just what I was thinking. That's what it boiled down to.
Yep.
You know.
Yep, I absolutely agree. Very well said, Charles. Thank you. Brian in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, how you doing there? So glad to get on. Two things that I got. Trying to get you and your ilk, your style, your savvy, your know-how in front of either Kennedy's, tort lawyers, Bloomberg, Soros, or Benzos, anybody to get you guys more widely heard. It's just a shame that I can get any cable, basic cable, and I hear Fox and garbage all day long, and that's the standard diet, and it's just killing that you guys.
Yeah.
Guys can't be more
It's the
widely
corporate
heard.
media, although we're doing pretty good, Brian. We're Talkers Magazine ranks our audience at around 6 million, and and that doesn't include Free Speech TV, which is in 66 million homes, I think, now, and you know, on Dish and Direct, we're doing just fine.
One more thing too.
Yeah.
Thank you, though. But there's a guy I've been listening to over the last couple of months, a fellow out of Brown University, Scottish, working class background, a fellow called Mark Blythe, and he has got a take on the economy and how it works and the whole recession that we had, and God knows people are still living through it all across the world.
Yeah.
And if you could get him on, I would say that if you listen to him, you guys would see eye to eye in a split second backwards.
Okay.
And he's got
I'll check it out. I'm pretty sure that
doing it. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's on my Twitter feed. I've seen his stuff.
I think he is. Yeah.
Brian, thanks for the
if you could get him on,
the tip.
Get him heard.
Yep, I appreciate the call. Dwight in Minneapolis. Hey, Dwight, what's up?
Hello, Tom. How are you today?
I am fine, thank you. I hope you are too.
My comment is the last person that was on your that called in yesterday on your program. I'd like to address that person, you know, because and I'm hearing it more and more where black people are expressing their resentment to the idea of helping the doctors. You know, President Obama granted DACA status to these kids when they came in with their parents through no fault of their own. And when he did that, it was out of compassion. It was the same compassion that white farmers showed us during the Underground Railroad when we were fleeing from the South, going to the North and stuff. We have to have compassion for anyone who is oppressed. Oppression, we should be on the side of the oppressed. We can't fight racism by ourselves. We need to unite with other people that are oppressed just like we are. And we should stop letting Donald Trump play us by throwing a bone and having us fight over it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's going on here. You know, he's throwing a bone and he's expecting people like that last lady that called and stuff. He's expecting those kind of sentiments to support him and his racist idea. This guy is nothing but a predatory degenerate, and we cannot ally black struggle to a low-life, predatory degenerate such as Trump.
You're talking about Trump, yeah. Yeah, yeah, Dwight. This is, you know, I've spoken about this many times recently, and I'm interested to hear how many people of color, African Americans, specifically have called into this program. Just in the last few days, it's almost like it's kind of a little mini wave, and said, why are the Democrats all bent out of shape about these kids from Mexico when they're not all bent out of shape about the problems that African Americans are facing every day? And I understand why the Republican Party would want to promote that idea, you know, why they would push it the same way that back in the 1950s and 60s when I was a kid, they were promoting the idea that if you gave civil rights to African Americans, they would take away white people's jobs. And so now they're saying to African Americans, if you bring in these dreamers, you're going to take away black people's jobs. It is a divide and conquer strategy, pure and simple. And I completely agree with you, Dwight, that we all need to be on the side of all oppressed peoples, number one. And number two, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can bring in the dreamers, and we can do reparations. We can clean up this country and society. We can rebuild, the tattered pieces that are left of Lyndon Johnson's great society, and build a multicultural, multiracial middle class, but certainly deal with the horrors that we've inflicted upon people of color and Native Americans over the years in this country. Dwight, thank you so much for the call. Very well said. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be checking with Talk Media News in a few minutes, find out what's going on in the world, and picking up your calls as well. Stick around. And welcome back, Anthony in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Anthony, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, how you doing? I'm here to talk about, I'd like to first point out that Fox News, that's a complete lie. Come on. I love how they dismiss the fact that CNN started asking how much ice cream does Donald Trump eat? How much TV does Donald Trump watch? So don't give me the Sunni. They're all, fake news. Come on. The one thing I'm here to ask you about is a question or a topic they kept talking about is the immigration. And the problem I have with that is that it's not immigration. They're illegal aliens that came to this country. They took the risk of coming to this country.
I don't think that you could argue, Anthony, that a 2-year-old decided to take a risk.
Here's the thing. They just...
No, here's no thing. You can't argue that a 2-year-old decided to take a risk. You cannot argue that. Any more than you can argue that African Americans decided to come over to the United States.
Here's the thing. They're illegal immigrants. You're forgetting the fact that they're illegal immigrants. They're not people.
Is that a problem, Anthony? Is that a problem with them, or is that a problem with the law? Because they were not illegal immigrants until Donald Trump pulled DACA.
No,
they had a legal status in the United States until Donald Trump changed the law. Donald Trump he blew up Barack Obama's executive order that created the Deferred Action
dismiss the fact that
program.
Obama deported numerous.
That's not what we're talking about, Anthony. You are twisting things. I don't understand why. What's the thing here? Is it that you hate children? Is that it?
No, I don't.
Oh, you just hate children with brown skin?
I'm very pro-life. Here's the thing. I'm very pro-life. I went to the pro-life march.
Here's the thing, Anthony. You don't seem to give a rat's ass about people once they're born, especially if they happen to be brought to this country by their parents. I don't get that. That seems to me like an insanely hypocritical position.
It's not hypocritical. If they came here illegal, I'm not talking about 2-year-olds. I'm talking about these people who came here, just decided that, hey, if we have a baby there, we're gonna stay here. That's the people I'm talking about.
So now you've gone from DACA kids to anchor babies to be outraged about? Anthony, why any outrage at all? 40 million Americans were born outside the United States. American citizens, people who are American citizens right now, born outside the United States. That's a good thing for our country.
They went through the process. They went through the process. They did not.
I'm talking about adults.
They came here on an
yes.
airplane.
So?
But here's the thing. Okay.
The process that President Obama put into place was to say, if you were not, functional, if you were a child when you came to this country, when your parents were brought you to this country, and you had no say in that matter, you are not to blame. You are not at fault. And that's a core human value that anybody who values the right to life would value. I don't understand why you would want to take a kid who came to the United States from, say, El Salvador at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 and does not speak Spanish, does not know El Salvador, does not know where the bad gangs are and the awful people are, and you want to take that person and fly them down to El Salvador and just push them out of an airplane, virtually guaranteeing that their life is going to be ruined and they may well end up dead. That sounds to me like morally criminal, Anthony. Just horrific. And how you can claim that you support life, that's crap. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. Hey, Ellen, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I was so shocked. About an hour ago, I got an email from the Council of Mayors. Now, they say they are bipartisan, even though Mitch Landrieu, who, of course, is sister senator from Louisiana.
Mary Landrieu, yeah.
That's right. But they are now refusing a meeting with Donald Trump at the White House today, which was supposed to happen before Donald Trump took off for Davos, Switzerland, because they say they don't like the way Donald Trump talks about immigrants.
Whoa. And the mayors, it's bipartisan.
It's bipartisan, and Mitch Landrieu said that they are not taking the meeting with the White House. Now, in all my days, and I've been doing this a long time like you, I have not ever seen anything like that.
That's remarkable.
It is quite remarkable. Okay, now then there's a question about why we're so complacent on some of the school shootings. It's interesting, one of the research groups put together, it's a liberal group called Everyone for Gun Safety, but they now say that the Kentucky shooting that happened, I think yesterday, was the 10th incident since January 1st.
Right.
So, I mean, you have these gun shootings going on in schools, and nobody's dealing with it.
Yep. Or nobody's even talking about them, Ellen.
Well, and what's interesting is today the White House put out a press release, and they said that they had brought more cases against violent criminals in any other year than decades, and they talked all about what they've done in terms of criminality and changing things. And then we find out that here is the 10th shooting since the 1st of January. We're only at the 24th of January.
Right. Yep.
Unbelievable. Okay, more news.
And those are just, by the way, those are just the school shootings. I mean, you know, they're
oh, that's right. Those are just the school shootings that we're not paying attention to.
Right.
Okay, now I decided that you and I are in the wrong business. We should be lobbying.
Okay.
Because $368 million was spent on lobbying last year. That's a 15% increase. And Google alone spent $18 million lobbying.
Yeah, this is how Grover Norquist became a multimillionaire. Running a lobbying shop. You know, it's how Tony Podesta became a multimillionaire. There's big money in lobbying.
Well, you and I are in the wrong business.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of big money in radio.
No, there's not. But I'm happy, so I'm okay.
Well, I'm happy too. But oh my gosh, when I read those figures, I was just astounded.
Yeah. And what's remarkable is Google, which is being taken to task in Europe for antitrust violations, it was the largest lobbyist in the United States in what was the fourth quarter, I think, or maybe it was all of last year.
What happened is that they lobbied against any kind of rules being put on online advertisement. That's where their lobbying went. $16 million.
Yeah. Well, everybody is lobbying for their own interests. This is why we need to get money out of politics.
I don't disagree. I mean, you and I are on the same page on all of that. Okay. So the other interesting thing is that Flynn, when he was still in the White House, met secretly with FBI investigators without the president's knowledge. Now, NBC News reported this. This is really interesting because he probably gave away some of the store, and that may be why, if they found out about it or saw these FBI guys there, maybe why they fired Flynn. We don't know.
Right. It is interesting that he was trying to hide from his colleagues in the White House the fact that he was being interviewed by the FBI. That reeks of guilty knowledge.
Oh, it certainly does. And it reeks about what has been told to the special counsel, who, of course, now wants to interview the president.
Right.
The problem with them interviewing the president is the president could say, well, I have executive privilege, which is what he said when Bannon was interviewed at Congress.
Right.
And then it will go up to the Supreme Court.
Yep. Where Neil Gorsuch will bow and scrape and do his duty.
Well, that's correct. But maybe Justice Kennedy won't.
We'll see.
That's right. I mean, he goes both ways. Okay, so the president, now that he's not meeting with the mayors, of course, it was announced that he was going to do this after he met with the mayors, is going to go to Davos. He's expected to talk about the tax decrease and say America's open for business. And what's fascinating about that is America may be open for business, but and he's talking about all his jobs that he's making, but up to 40,000 jobs have been lost in travel, in the tourism business in the United States, because people aren't coming here.
Right. There's been, what, a 3% decrease in inbound tourism? We used to be the second most popular destination in the world, and I'm not sure where we rank now, but we're no longer second.
We certainly are not. Anyway, he's expected in Davos to meet with Theresa May from Great Britain. He's expected to meet with Netanyahu. And then on Friday, he's going to give his speech. And then he is expected to meet with the head of the African Union. So that should be very interesting. I wish I was a fly on the wall in that one.
Do you know if he's bringing Stephen Miller with him?
I did not see that on the list, but I could have missed it.
Yeah, I read the list and I didn't see it I didn't see him on the list either. But yeah, I mean, because Stephen Miller is the one who gets him cranked up. John Kelly obviously is going to have to go along, but Kelly and Miller seem to be the hardcore right wingers that keep pushing Trump back into. I mean, Michael Wolff's book, Trump was actually in favor of Medicare for all. And they're like, oh no, you don't.
I know.
So, anyhow, we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News, brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen's new book, Loving What You Do. Ellen, thank you.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back. Are you addicted to your smartphone? Stick around. We'll have that conversation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before. And it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases, both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves, meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving, but forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution, but we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we look, really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on-again, off-again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. So this is
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the UK, there is a movement called Time to Log Off. And it's time to log off your phone. The concern is that people are becoming computer and particularly specifically smartphone addicted. There's an article by Hannah Kuchler in today's Financial Times newspaper. She notes, even in Silicon Valley, people are turning off the notifications that constantly buzz for their attention. I've basically turned off the notifications on, I think, every app on my phone. And curiously changing the colors on their screens to a less seductive scale of gray. In other words, you could take all the color out of your smartphone. And in this article, Hannah Kuchler is talking about how big tech now is being thought of as big tobacco. Basically, they're selling a product that addicts people. And there's people pushing back. JANA Partners and California Teachers Pension are asking Apple to make their phones less addictive to children or give parents options to limit their children's phone use. Arjuna Capital and New York State Common Retirement Fund have submitted proposals to Facebook, she writes, and Twitter, calling them to stop sexual harassment on their platforms. I guess that's kind of a slightly different argument. But the point is that the average American spends about 4 hours a day looking at their smartphone. And probably another 4 hours a day looking at their computer. And in this article, she's talking about getting public service announcements to warn parents and warn people that, you know, your smartphone may be addictive and all this kind of thing. Ultimately, you know, like non-smoking areas in restaurants, you have no smartphone zones in restaurants. And, you know, eventually, she ends the article, smartphones could be banned from all public places, shunned in favor of actually giving our attention to the people around us instead. And I've always thought it a little strange. I walk into a restaurant and I see, you know, people sitting at a table and they're both looking at their phones instead of looking at each other. Although I have to confess, there have been times, particularly when news is breaking, when Louise and I have been out and, you know, suddenly Trump has tweeted something and it's like, okay, we're both looking at our phones. But the point that is missed by this article, and that you're only finding by and large in the literature of the psychological and psychiatric communities. It has to do with a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a compound that gives us a high, basically. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is what spikes in your body when you drink caffeine. Dopamine is what spikes in your body when you snort cocaine or when you take crystal meth. Those all almost exclusively stimulate dopamine and you know, things associated with the dopamine system. And of course, adrenaline, adrenochrome, and those kind of things. But principally, it's all about the dopamine. And so we know that if you can give somebody a drug that stimulates dopamine production, or that jacks dopamine, that they will use that drug over and over and over again, even to their detriment, even to the point of, I mean, you know, look at crack addicts or meth heads, you know, whose teeth are falling out and their bodies are falling apart and their livers are decaying and they're dying. They're literally dying because they're addicted to the dopamine that drug, whether it's crack or whether it's meth or whatever it may be, that drug is stimulating in their bodies. Well, it turns out this is something that the people at Silicon Valley know all about. They're real familiar with this. And in fact, you play a little solitaire game on your phone, for example. And if you win it, boom, you know, your phone goes off with a little explosion of starbursts or colors or whatever. It gives you a reward. And that reward stimulates dopamine. You tweet something, somebody tweets it back. You get, oh, gee, look at that. There's a small dopamine hit there. But mostly it's the programs. These apps are designed to be highly addictive. They call it stickiness in Silicon Valley, but it's really addiction. To make us come back over and over and over again to them so that by the end of the week, we're looking back and going, geez, you know, this week I spent 7 hours playing solitaire on my phone. Or I spent 7 hours, you know, thumbing through YouTube videos on my phone. Or I spent 7 hours, I mean, fill in the blank, watching cat videos. You know, whatever your particular thing may be, you know, each one of us gets our dopamine high off slightly different things. But dopamine is at the core of porn addiction, is at the core of gambling addiction, it's at the core of most drug addictions, it's at the core of sex addiction, it's at the core of most of these addictions that just grab us and that we seem to have no willpower over. And increasingly, app developers and smartphone manufacturers and website developers, because this is not just limited to cell phones. You see people who literally, at the end of the day, if you ask them, how many hours did you spend on your computer today? It would be, 5, 6, 7 hours, something like that. And they're going back to the same news sites over and over again, looking for a refresh and how, you know, whatever it may be. It's an addiction. It's an addictive process. So what to do about it? Well, there's, you know, instructions on how to turn all your apps, get the color out of your apps, so when the little explosion goes off, the fireworks congratulating you on winning the game or whatever it may be, it doesn't look quite so bright and colorful and it doesn't jack your dopamine quite as hard. There's turning off the notifications because each one is a, you know, neurochemical stimulus. Bing, hey, look at that. Dopamine. It's practicing safe smartphoning. That's a kind of a cliche or a attempt at a cliche, but you know, deciding, you know, I'm not going to check my phone for another hour. I'm not going to check my phone for 2 hours. I have found myself, and maybe the reason why this topic resonates with me is because I think I'm a smartphone addict. You know, hi, I'm Tom and I'm an addict. I'll be sitting there, you know, doing whatever I'm doing, and I'll just pick up my phone and just start browsing through, you know, I'll have a half a dozen news sites open, and Twitter and Facebook and, you know, all this other stuff, and just start thumbing through it. I'm bored. I think that, you know, we need to learn to sit Zen more often. You know, we need to quiet our brains a little bit, and we need to disengage ourselves from these addictive processes. And we need to recognize that just like the tobacco companies started adding ammonia to tobacco in the 1950s and 60s, because it freebases the nicotine. It makes the nicotine go into your bloodstream much more rapidly because it alkalizes it. And so it binds to the more acidic blood that you have. So when you smoke tobacco that has been treated with ammonia, it's the exact same number of milligrams of nicotine, but it hits you more like injecting it than smoking it. It hits you really hard and really fast. And that, you know, just like the tobacco companies have known about this and they've been doing this for years and years, and we've been unable to stop them. I mean, in the 90s, when the tobacco lawsuits and everything, they're still treating tobacco with ammonia to make it crack tobacco. And the same thing is happening with our smartphones, and the same thing is happening with our computers. And I think, you know, as more and more people are reporting anxiety, and we're seeing this explosion. You know, 15% of the American population in the last year had got a prescription for a psychoactive drug. We're seeing an explosion of this kind of stuff. And we're being told it's all because of Donald Trump. Well, it might be because, you know, we're jacking our brains with our smartphones. What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They're all full right now, so if you want to call on the topic, you know, give it a few minutes, because there's a bunch of people who want to talk about other things first, but we'll come back to this. Stick around. And welcome back, Robert in Price, Utah. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I know you've seen what Tammy Duckworth, Senator Duckworth, had to say the other day on the floor of the Senate, and I was jumping up, going right on, and I'm thinking Tammy Duckworth for president. What are your thoughts?
I'd vote for her in a heartbeat. But these days, I'd vote for any Democrat in a heartbeat. But Tammy Duckworth is particularly good. She is. She's not quite Bernie Sanders, but she's definitely not, you know, some, you know, middle of the road Democrat or whatever. I think she's great. And hey, did you hear she's going to be the first woman to give birth while being a sitting United States senator? She's pregnant, and she's 50. That's extraordinary. I mean, you know,
yes.
I wish her the very best in her pregnancy and her birth.
Yes, me too. But my point is she's got Teflon on her. Everything that, I mean, anybody that comes up against Trump, he's going to attack them. Let him attack her.
Right, a woman
Nothing
her legs in Iraq.
Stick.
Yep. Yeah, she is a what's the word? Friendly character. You know, she's a person that it is hard to dislike or hate. And I think you're right, Robert. Excellent point. Thanks for the call. Terry in Chicago. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi again, Tom. I just finished Kurt Anderson's book called Fantasyland that tries to explain how we got where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's quite a read, and it doesn't quite explain it, but the language that we're using and the fact that we trust corporations has been going on since, my God, the 70s or the 60s. You know, it's I hate the New York Times just like you, but my local papers are even worse. So they'll have an article about, the subway in New York running over budget. They immediately say the workers are getting paid $1,000 a day. And you and I both know that when we get our car repaired, the worker that did it didn't get paid $150 an hour. Right. And, you know, but that's on the bill, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of that stuff it's everywhere, Tom. It's pervasive. It's an anti-union language all over the place. It's also now it's an well, we know they're anti-post office because the post office works. And they hate things that function.
Well, I think the principal hatred of the post office on the part of the Republican Party is that it is the largest unionized employer in America.
Well, you've got that too. It's not only that, but also it works.
Yes.
And if you suggest that they could take care of payday loans in their sleep, be no problem. They already did it during the Depression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
the post office has tremendous potential. Bernie's been all over that for years and years, and it's a good one.
When in mentioning Bernie, you should look into his Senate Bill 805. That it's a tax on the LaSalle Street and Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And if it was just changed to 0.5%, it would be $3.3 trillion.
Amazing. Which tells you how much money Wall Street has.
I'm running out, but Grover Norquist just hired all of Saul Alinsky's descendants.
Yeah, I'm with you. Terry, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
So, are you addicted to your smartphone? You think? I don't know. We'll see if anybody wants to talk about that. Richard in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Richard, you wanted to talk about DNC and messaging?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I try to get on. It seems like it comes up a lot. Now, you would be a good judge. So many people call in, and it seems to me like one of the essential things. I mean, what we want the Democrats is superior to the Republicans. I think in so many ways, if properly, presented. You had a person who called on and said, with a great idea, messaging. He said about we'll build it when the Mexicans pay for it. I mean, it's like greased. That message is greased already because Trump greased it by saying it's what he was going to do. So the thing to me that I wanted to ask him is, why does he keep saying we have a problem with messaging? When's someone going to do something about it? Who do we talk to? Who do we write? What are the steps being taken? It'd be great to have a whole show focused on the very bad messaging that's going on. It's killing us.
Yeah, the problem in the Democratic Party that has to do with messaging, Richard, is, in my opinion, that, and to some extent the Republican Party has this also, is that, these parties are fairly large tent places, and they have factions within them. And so you have, some people who want national single-payer health care and in the Democratic Party. And you've got other people who, because of their alliances and allegiances over the years with pharmaceutical companies or with hospital organizations, would rather not have, Medicare for all, single-payer health care. Yeah.
But could I throw out that, the other side does have, that same problem, but they get a message out.
I know.
And
there's a reason for that.
It's amazing that within... Yeah, well, but even within the Democratic Party, their own numbers and getting their way, they're going to have a better chance with Democrats, but they can't be culled together somehow and present.
Yeah, this is where I was going with that line of thinking, Richard, is that in the Republican Party, you've got this large donor class, the Koch network, that generates generated close to $1 billion for the last campaign, and others, the Shelley Adelsons of the world and the Mercers of the world and whatnot. And so many of the Republicans, in fact, I would say probably well over 95% of the Republicans, are getting some, if not most, of their funding out of these right-wing organizations and corporations aligned with them, the gun manufacturers and things like that. On the Democratic side, there's much more diversity in funding and in perspective. And as a result of that, it's harder to get all the Democrats together on a single message because of the diversity in the Democratic Party. And, I mean, we just heard this in the last caller to Mark Pocan today. For example, in the Democratic coalition, you've got people who are concerned about the plight of African Americans, particularly, you know, in big cities in the United States, where years and years and years of segregation and redlining and horrible schools and lead in the water and everything else have created, you know, essentially a Holocaust of sorts. And then on the other hand, you've got people who are saying, but wait a minute, you know, we're concerned about the Dreamers. And then you get the Republicans coming along saying to African Americans, oh, those Dreamers are going to take your jobs, as they've been saying to white people for years and years about African Americans themselves. So all this conflict is being exploited by the Republicans. Conflict is maybe the wrong word. And the spectrum of concerns, and then you've got other Democrats who are concerned about corporations ripping us off. You've got other Democrats who are concerned about election integrity. It's like, where do you begin, right? There's so much on the table. And the Republicans have been really good at boiling it down to basically 3 messages every election cycle, pounding those messages over and over and over again. And they're backed up by their billionaire funders who run the ads. It's just like the ad that just ran day before yesterday that Trump put out, that he emailed to me, along with millions of other people, that said that, you know, any Democrat in the future will have blood on their hands from any American citizen killed by an illegal immigrant.
Well, Tom?
Yeah.
But that's what I want to ask. You know, I mean, the question I'd love to ask the representative is, you know, what is his explanation? You've given a very plausible, and I think it's 100% right. But, you know, take the example you just offered about yesterday. That SOB in the White House said that about Democrats. I mean, I can't believe that no matter your concern as a Democrat, that you wouldn't be furious and ready out for blood.
But here's the problem,
that guy
Richard.
said that to me.
One of the things that we know out of the field of psychology is that when you repeat a lie, it becomes more credible. And so if the Democrats were to go out and say, how dare Donald Trump say that we have the blood of American citizens on our hands because, you know, we're in favor of DACA, you know, if Americans get killed by illegal immigrants or undocumented persons. The moment they say that, they raise the credibility of that meme that Trump has put out there.
Yeah, well,
so what do you do with that? And that's why I think that the Democrats need to go on offense. The Democrats, instead of constantly playing defense, instead of constantly saying, "Oh no, we're only trying to do this or that, and we're not trying," you know, instead the Democrats need to be saying, "We want single-payer health care now. We want full funding for public education all the way through PhD at no expense to American citizens now. We want, you know, just a couple of fundamental things. Come up with you know, we want tax parity. We want, you know, billionaires and big corporations to be paying their fair share of taxes, and we want the government funded now. These 3 things are what we're going to run on over this 2-year cycle. We are committed to these things. We're going to make these things happen. We're going to fight for them. And you don't always get what you want, you know, and you don't always get it quickly. I mean, you just ask Susan B. Anthony, who died never seeing women vote. But that didn't stop her from fighting the fight. And that's Richard, I think the biggest problem is that a lot of people don't perceive Democrats as fighting that fight. And it needs to be more aggressive.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The Democratic Party needs to slightly dial back what they're against and radically amp up what they are for. And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading From Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey, and the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising, but it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been, and they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics. This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number 2, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm for the Presidency. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Frank in Chicago. Hey, Frank, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Yes. I just recently found out that IV bags in hospitals of sodium chloride or normal saline has been having extreme shortage. And the reason being is all the bags are made in Puerto Rico. A company of Baxter, Hospera, and B. Braun are the manufacturers, but they only have it done in Puerto Rico.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I guess so.
So the hurricane knocked out their facilities. This is, for people who don't know what you're talking about, the saline bags. This is basically, you know, half a liter or a liter of water that has enough salt in it that it's got the same salt levels that your blood does. So it's basically a way of hydrating people, of getting fluids into the body, or a way of, you know, you add drugs to these things to slowly infuse the drugs into the body. And so they're real common. I mean, you know, you check into a hospital, odds are you're going to have a saline bag hooked up to you. And I didn't realize there was a shortage of them.
There's been an extreme shortage since the hurricane season.
Huh. Interesting.
And I guess the flu has made it stronger yet.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thanks for the tip on that, Frank. And was that the point that you wanted to make?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. I appreciate the call. Barry in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Barry, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me all right?
I hear you fine. It sounds like you're on speaker, but it's not terrible. What's up?
Okay. The guy before who called, who was against the Dreamers, but said he was pro-life.
Right. I'm
a pro-life person, and that's just insulting. If you look at what pro-life stands for, you know, it stands for pro-life. So health care is part of pro-life. The anti-death penalty is a part of pro-life. Support of refugees is a part of pro-life. Clean water and the environment is part of pro-life. If you do some study on what pro-life really stands for, you know,
well, prior to 1973,
way more pro-life, but they have the one abortion issue.
Yeah, prior to 1973, there was a very large pro-life movement in the United States. It was called the pro-life movement, and it was an anti-death penalty movement. That was the name that the anti-death penalty movement used from the 19-teens, I believe, certainly up until 1973. And by 1976 or 77, the anti-abortion movement had basically co-opted the name and held it as their own. And, you know, I think it's real unfortunate because I agree with you. I think that, you know, we're all in favor of life, and it's much bigger than that. Well said, Barry. Thanks a lot for the call. Barbara in Huntsville, Arkansas. Whoop, Barbara just vanished. Okay, let's try Jim in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, sir. First off, first-time caller. I am addicted to my smartphone. My son is too. We got to watch that.
Okay. My name's Jim, and I'm an addict. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. I actually just wanted to talk about the DACA and Schumer and how people that I normally align myself with feel about it and how they're angered at him. My feeling is that the Democratic Party ultimately is responsible to the working class, whether they be working class poor, middle class, upper middle class, but most Americans.
Right.
And that government shutdown is something that Republicans do, not Democrats. And that's my feeling, is that, you know...
Well, the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. Exactly. I don't see how you can claim that this government shutdown was caused by Democrats.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and this is what bothers me when I see these, you know, when I see
my opinion is that Chuck Schumer did everything right. Chuck Schumer did what he could do. He dealt, you know, he worked with the cards that were dealt him. The problem was the messaging, and the messaging was all over the map, and the media was just picking up the Republican message constantly because the Republicans were pounding on their message, whereas the Democrats were not. There is not a good, functional, central messaging system for the Democratic Party, and there is no substantial left-wing media ecosystem like there is a right-wing media system. There's not a left-wing billionaire who owns an entire television network. In fact, MSNBC is owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing company. There's no left-wing radio network like Air America used to be. There's no left-wing large owners of thousands of radio stations like Mitt Romney's Clear Channel or the Dickey Brothers Cumulus that own thousands of stations, and they're openly conservative, and they put conservative talk radio on all of them. The media of the United States has been co-opted by money and by the right to a large extent, and so that's how the messaging is happening. And we've got a hell of a lot of work to do to fix that. Number one, and number two, it could start with the Democrats themselves getting together on what their message is going to be. And I realize, there's a lot of issues where there's shades of gray and there's nuance, and you've got, the Joe Manchins of the world having very different worldviews than the Bernie Sanderses of the world and all that kind of stuff. But still, I think that, we need to move forward on this. Jim,
and we should have a Big Ten. I don't have a problem with a Big Ten Democratic Party. Just one last thing is just 2018. That's when you're going to get DACA. You have to wait. You have to vote these guys in.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about taking back political power. It has to be. I'm totally with you, Jim. Thank you, Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was just going to chime in on the cell phone addiction discussion that we were having here.
Mm-hmm.
And throw out there that if you're staring at your phone at nighttime and you don't have the blue light filter enabled on your phone, that'll actually stimulate the brain into thinking that you're staring into sunlight, and that so it'll naturally disrupt those circadian rhythms. So you'll actually stay up all night staring at your phone because you can't go to sleep because your body thinks it's awake because you're staring at the phone. I've used an app called Twilight. There's an app called Twilight, and I know it's available for Android phones, and it's free, and I believe it's also available for Mac.
Well, Apple has built this into the operating system now, so it's automatic, where the blue fades out, so the phone looks kind of orangish at night, and except you get used to it so fast you don't quite notice it. But yeah. But the blue light is not just a problem with cell phones. It's the same. It's the exact same problem with having a television in the bedroom.
Oh, definitely. So when my kids are trying to go to sleep, I'll actually turn down the brightness on it. Right. Otherwise, no matter what's on, they're just going to stay up and stare at it all night. So, if they're used to going to sleep with the TV, or sometimes I'll put on the classical station, but I'll reduce the brightness and the contrast so they don't so it doesn't keep their minds spinning all night long.
Right. Excellent, Marty. Thank you for sharing that. That's spot on. Mike in Fresno, California. Hey, Mike, you wanted to talk about deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA?
Yes, I have a two-part question on DACA. First of all, I'm talking to a lot of people, and they're hearing from the Republicans it's about amnesty, it's about illegal aliens. If the Democrats would just say deferred action, concentrate, this is a deferred action, and it needs to be addressed in 2019, not now.
Here's the problem, Mike. Deferred is an uncommon word that has more than one syllable. Without sounding too snarky, I suspect that a lot of Republicans don't have any idea what you're talking about when you say deferred action.
Oh, well, good point. To me, it means that you're put on hold, and you're not going to be the first ones kicked out of the country.
Right, but you've got an IQ above room temperature.
Kicked out of the country next month. Trump could start kicking these guys out.
Yep.
And I just think a lot of Americans don't really understand the issue. And they're listening to this amnesty issue, which goes back to Ronald Reagan, which is not the same.
Yes. And Reagan actually endorsed amnesty itself. I mean, Reagan gave a speech on amnesty. In fact, I think I've got it. Hang on just a second.
I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though some time back they may have entered illegally.
There you go, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, yeah. But two-part question.
Yeah.
Second part is Trump wrote a signing statement eliminating DACA. Can Trump make a signing statement to cancel his eliminating of DACA.
Of course. Easy.
So he could undo this without the House or the Senate.
That's correct. And that should have been the main message that the Democrats were promoting all the way back to 3 months ago when Trump first did this. Is, Donald Trump, undo your executive order and, let these kids stay here.
And then we don't have to shut down the government.
That's right.
Deal,
That's right.
Deal done.
This begins and ends with Donald Trump. And that, as I've said many times, that should have been the Democratic Party's message. Unfortunately, it was, dreamers are sort of like, teddy bears and puppies. Oh, they're cute and they're nice. But that's all true. But, and it's these inspiring stories and all this wonderful stuff. But that's not going to sell Republicans, and it's not going to convince, it's not going to address the fundamental political reality that Donald Trump blew this up, and now he is condemning the Democrats for not fixing what he broke.
And these are kids that speak the English language better than some Americans.
That's right. Probably better than many Americans. Yes.
But they've got one more chance in 3 weeks to win the verbal debate.
Yeah. I'm with you, and we'll see how it shakes out, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the call. We just all need to keep an eye on this thing. But like I said, there's a lot of issues that are of great importance right now that the Democratic Party can and is, to a large extent, promoting. And that messaging needs to be more frequently highlighted. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day, my thoughts on it, and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Kevin in Mountain House, California. Hey, Kevin, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up? What's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I've been a very long time listener and watcher since 2004 on Air America.
Oh, my goodness.
Until right now.
Thank you.
And I just can't tell you how much I really enjoy all of your commentary. I wanted to ask you about Trump and his supporters. L.A. Weissel, if I'm saying his name correctly, who died last year, I'm paraphrasing.
L.A. Weissel.
He said something in regard to don't hate the haters.
Right.
And I just want to your opinion. I know that evidently you have training as a psychotherapist as well. And just like psychologically, spiritually, whatever, how do you kind of, counter that, the gut reaction of, feeling that their ignorance of the supporters and everything is just so disturbing, and just the refusal of people to be able to empathize with others and all of that.
Right.
I don't want to be going all over the board here, but just kind of a general comment. I
think the point that he was making, and he was a Holocaust survivor, so he had great credibility to make these kinds of points, was that hate is a poison. Hate is corrosive. It's like sulfuric acid. You inject hate into something and it begins to dissolve it. It begins to destroy it. And so the extent to which we fight against evil in our lives and we push back against evil, we have to do that out of a place grounded in present, in I am here, it is now, this is what I'm doing. Not do it out of a place of I hate this person or this policy or whatever because, here's my long list of 27 rationalizations why I hate it. There is no, or there's very little justification for hate. I understand, if somebody comes in and they slaughter your family, you're going to hate them. There's just, horrible things happen. And people wonder, why hatred coming out of the Middle East as we're droning people and things like that. So, I get it. Hate happens. But to the extent to which, particularly in wealthy countries like the United States, where we're not literally under constant physical assault, we have the luxury of not devolving into hate. And Elie Wiesel, if I'm pronouncing his name right, I'm not certain either. You know, that would be the German pronunciation. W's are pronounced like V's in German. But in any case, you know, he survived the Holocaust. I mean, you know, he went through an unimaginable situation where virtually everybody he knew was murdered by these people. And he would not allow himself to be eaten up by hate. And it's such wise advice. And it's psychologically, it's so healthy. We are more competent, more effective at advocating for the issues that we care about strongly if we do it with passion rather than hate. And there's a very, very real difference between the two. Is that making sense to you, Kevin?
Yes, thank you very much. And I also just wanted to say one other thing, and that is to kind of paraphrase United States kind of saying, I feel it's divided we stand, united we fall.
Why would you say that?
Because right now we're divided, but if
I see. So you're making that as a statement of where we're at. I don't disagree with that. Yeah, good point, Kevin. Yeah. Thank you for the call. Thank you very much, and thanks for your kind words. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Adele in Farmington, Michigan. Hey, Adele, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to tell you just a quick story about how the tax cuts have affected me and my job.
Okay.
Okay. So the last week of December, we received a memo that posted about the tax cuts and how that was great for the company. I work for a big financial mortgage company. Mm-hmm. And in the memo, it said anyone making $100,000 or less would get a $1,000 one-time bonus, mm-hmm. and that they were also increasing their minimum wage to $15 an hour, which didn't affect me because I didn't make minimum wage. I made more. Mm-hmm. The next week, the first week in January, I was laid off, and I just received that one-time $1,000 bonus, and they taxed it 35%.
Oh, my.
35% for $1,000.
Yeah. So the tax cut ended up causing you to lose your job. You believe,
yes.
Adele? Yeah.
Causing me, yeah, absolutely. Not only did I get laid off, but 30 other people got laid off, and I think a few others got demoted. Yep. So they were going to be paid less.
Yeah, it is so sad. The principal activity that companies are engaging in right now as a result of the tax cut, with the billions, with the trillions. This is a $5 trillion tax cut over a 10-year period. The trillions of dollars. What they're doing is they're buying back their own stock, and people don't understand what that means when they read in the paper or they hear on the radio or TV that company A, company B, company C. You know, only 10 companies have committed to actually raise the wages of their workers since the tax cut, and all of them are fairly marginal in terms of the raises and the number of employees affected. Most of the publicity went to companies like you're talking about, Adele, where you work, where they say, oh, we're going to give a $1,000 bonus, we're going to raise the minimum wage, oh, and we're going to lay a bunch of people off. But they also will say, and you know, I went through the list last week, I believe it was last Thursday or Friday, of, you know, I mean, literally buying back $5 billion worth of stock, $4 billion worth of stock, $3 billion worth of stock. These big companies buying back the shares. Why would they do this? Because they pay their executives with stock, and the value of the stock and the dividends paid on the stock are a function of the number of shares divided by the value of the company. So if you've got a company that's worth $1 billion and you've got 1 million shares of stock, each share of stock is worth $1,000, right? 1,000 times 1 million is $1 billion. So, so there's 1 million shares of stock out there. The company's worth $1 billion. Every share of stock is worth $1,000. If the company then gets a giant tax break and they get, say, another $1 billion from the government, and they take that $1 billion and they, well, that would be too much. Let's say they get $500 million. And so with the $500 million, they buy back half their shares. So now, instead of being 1 million shares in circulation, there's only 500,000 shares in circulation. They bought 500,000 shares at $1,000 a piece, bought them out of the market, and retired them. So now the company only has 500,000 shares, which means that every share, the value, the price of every share just went from $1,000 to $2,000 because there's half as many shares. So all the stockholders just got insanely richer. All the CEOs and senior executives who are compensated with stock, which, by the way, was illegal before the Reagan administration, all of them just got insanely richer. The investor class gets insanely richer, but not one extra product is sold, not one extra penny of profit is made, not one expansion of that company is done, not one employee is hired. Nobody benefits except the very, very, very top. That's what stock buybacks mean.
Because we didn't benefit, and, you know, 30-plus people lost their jobs. Some were demoted, and they didn't hire anyone.
And I would bet $50 that the stock price of the company that you work for, Adele, has gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet.
Yep.
I'm going to look into it.
Yep.
Thanks,
I guarantee it. Adele, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you.
James in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
I wanted to call and complain a little bit about callers calling in and complaining about DACA, dumping on DACA. And I can say this because I'm African American.
Okay.
First of all, I want to know if they have a heart. And secondly, I feel that they have bought entirely into the Republican strategy of divide and conquer.
I agree.
What's your opinion on that?
I completely agree, and I said this to an earlier caller. The Republican strategy back in the 50s and 60s, talking to white people about black people, about African Americans, was they're going to come and get your job. You know, you don't want to do that civil rights stuff because they're going to take your jobs. And now the Republicans are saying to black people, look out for those Hispanics, they're going to take your jobs. And it's the same old divide and conquer strategy of the overclass against the underclass, basically. It is the billionaires and the big corporations in the Republican Party trying to get all of us, you know, of all races fighting against each other so that we don't fight against them. That's the bottom line. James, thank you for the call. You said it so well. And I hope I matched your passion and your point. Thank you all so much for being with us today. It is a fascinating time to be alive. We will continue the conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag your head. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.